The Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees that anyone who is charged with a crime shall have the right to representation to assist them in their case. The Constitution's old. It wasn't until 1963 in a Supreme Court case called Gideon versus Wainwright that right was applied to all of the states in this nation. And because we guarantee the right to counsel to everyone who is charged with a crime, the public defense system was created to fulfill that obligation. Now, I knew that I wanted to be a public defender very early on in my life. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 6, but it wasn't because I knew what public defense was, and it wasn't because I knew about social issues. It was because I talked too much, was totally obstinate, and my parents told me I literally couldn't be anything else. It wasn't until I was 15 years old that I decided that public defense was what I wanted to do with my life. And that happened because I finally had the veil lifted away from my eyes as to what the people in this country who experience poverty deal with and are exposed to in our criminal justice system. Now, that happened to me when I was on a service trip to the Mississippi Delta with my high school. And it was to build houses for Habitat for Humanity. Now, it turns out I was real crap at building anything. So I spent most of my time on the basketball court with the other high school kids from the area. And they were all poor, and they were all black. We had virtually nothing in common other than our love of this sport. But the love of that sport allowed me to connect with them, to bond with them, to learn about them and their experiences. And for the first time, this middle-class white girl from the middle of Illinois cornfields saw what poverty was and what it does to people in this country. So I set myself on a path to interfere with what had happened to that group of boys that I was playing basketball with, who had no fathers because their fathers were either in prison or on parole. And some of them, even at the age of 16 or 17, already had felony convictions, which meant their future was doomed. You cannot get jobs. You cannot get student loans. In many states in this country, you cannot vote. You cannot raise your voice in support of the issues that you care about, all because of a mistake that happened to you early on in your life. So I said, nah, I'm going to get in the way of that. That is what I want to do with my life. So I went to law school. I spent my first year working at the Cook County Public Defender's Office, fell even more in love with this type of law. And then I started my career as a public defender. And I thought, wow, that is a rude awakening. Because for everything that I believed and all of my idealism about changing the system that we currently live in, what I walked into was under-resourcing, understaffing, judgment, and a general disregard for the entire population of people that I was trying to help. Now, I don't know where this paradigm got established, but that has been the way it has always been for public defenders. We don't get paid. We don't have enough money to hire experts. We don't have enough resources to adequately represent our clients. And all because, in spite of the fact that the founders of this nation declared this a fundamental right in the Constitution of the United States of America, we as a society have deemed my clients unworthy of that investment. Nobody wants to spend the money that it takes for us to help these people. The judgment and the ostracization of my clients by their peers in society is remarkable and depressing and awful. And yet, here we sit, us public defenders, in the middle of this system, trying to beat it down from the inside. Now, we get judgment from every direction. I get judgment from the public, who say things to me like, how can you represent this person? They did X. How do you sleep at night? Why would we spend more money on these people? And to the public, I say, I'm here for you too. So just imagine this story. Imagine that you are a middle-class, law-abiding citizen. You're driving down the highway. And some overzealous police officer decides that they need to pull you over because you look suspicious. If you haven't done anything illegal, what's going to happen to you on that day is you're going to be inconvenienced, you're going to be embarrassed potentially, you're going to be angry, but you're going to have no remedy. you're going to have nothing that you can do to stop that overzealous officer from making that mistake again in the first place. Because they didn't find anything on you, right? So what are you going to do? You can't sue them. We all got qualified immunity. So you're going to sit there and think, well, that sucked, and I have nothing that I can do about it. Now imagine that you're one of my clients, and let's say you had some weed in your car, and you do get charged in criminal court. That is the only time, the only opportunity that anyone in this country has to stand up and fight against the abuses of law enforcement. Because when you get charged with a crime, you get me. And then I get to bring that issue in front of a judge, and I get to stand up for everybody who would have been pulled over that day and said, no, 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 you can't do that. There was not reasonable suspicion. There was not probable cause. Improper stop. Fix your behavior and respect the rights of everyone in this country. So to the people that ask me, how do you do this? How could you represent them? I say, piece of cake. I sleep like a baby. Now, flip it. Let's talk about the judgment that we get from my actual clients. Because let's face it, public defenders in this country, we don't get resources. So we have, as a result, so many cases and so little time and so much stress that we can't physically dedicate ourselves to each client with the amount of effort and time that they deserve, because nobody cares to invest in that person. Now, the first time that public defender workload was studied was in the early 1970s. And they said, hey, it's cool if you spend about 8 hours on every single case. That's about how much time they gave us to work a single case. Well, I don't know about you, but drafting a motion to suppress and 8 hours of researching, arguing it, and then going to trial takes a hell of a lot longer than 8 hours. So what happens to us? We end up working nights. We end up working weekends. We end up burning out because we literally cannot keep up with the load with the resources that are given to us. And still, in the face of all of it, and I am not saying that I don't understand this perspective, but I have been called a public pretender. I've been asked, did I even go to law school? I got asked, is there any reason or way that you can help me when you don't have the time and you don't have the resources? You don't care about me? And I'm over here thinking, you have no idea who I am or why I do this. I know why I do this. I know why I work nights and weekends. I know why I'm so tired. So we're getting it from every angle. But you know what? Even though I cannot break down the criminal justice system from the inside, and I get asked this question by students sometimes, like, if you could go back, would you still do this? Would you still be a public defender? And I say, yeah, I would. Because on the one hand, I am an idealist, and I believe that as a society, we can choose to value my clients. We can choose to execute fair and equitable justice across the system, and I want that to happen. I want us not to put so much investment in prison. I want us to understand that we need to interfere with the root causes of crime and not just try to slap a Band-Aid on it after it already happens. But this is the system in which we live, and at the same time that I am an idealist, I am also a realist. I know what I have to work with. I know what society has invested in my clients and in me. And so every day, I will continue to fight. Because every single client, and I do not care what they did, I have represented thousands of people in the last 20 years. And not a single one of them has ever been evil. Not a single one of them is a bad person. They all have a story. They all have a history. They are all a whole human being. And if you can take the time to listen to them, to not judge them, and to understand that they had a different experience than you. I get so tired of hearing the narrative, everybody had a choice. They made the choice to commit this crime. And I said, well, everybody does have a choice. But it's different when you have the choice between starving to death or stealing from a grocery store, or if your choices are a smorgasbord of, do I want to go to tennis camp or golf camp? What overnight camp do I want to go to? Can my mommy and daddy buy me a tutor to help me in math? There are so many choices that the wealthy and the middle class have that the poor do not. Don't you judge them. Nobody can judge my clients for the choices that they have made. And if you delve into their history and treat them like a person with empathy and love and respect, you will uncover a history of trauma, a history of parents who weren't there, a dad who was in jail, nobody making sure they did homework, nobody making sure they ate food, nobody stopping the physical, emotional, or sexual abuse that happened to them, nobody stopping the cycle of violence that they found themselves in, nobody stopping the substance abuse or the trauma. Now, the law sometimes, most times, doesn't care about that trauma. It's a question of, did you do it or didn't you? And to that extent, our legal system is limited. But it is my job to put the whole person forward. Because even though the system may say you are guilty of a crime, the system must also recognize who you are, what happened to you, and justify the punishment that it wants to inflict on you, and also explore the ways to interfere with that so it never happens again. My client is a whole person whose personality, history, and trauma is going to be learned by me, listened to by me, and put forth so that everybody understands this is not something that you can just judge. So even though I cannot eliminate historic poverty and systemic racism, I can still show every client that I have in my orbit respect and empathy, and show and share their story with the judges and prosecutors and community members who would otherwise judge them with a lack of understanding, because they are people and they are our people. So keep up the good fight, because what my mother always said was that if you stand in the middle of your street and you put your arms wide and you turn in a circle, you can affect everyone you can touch. So I encourage all of you to continue to do that in your own lives and to keep fighting. Thank you.